Ryan Poles stuck to his strategy of best player available in the NFL draft, and that led to some great investment into this Chicago Bears offense. But I'm left wondering how this defense is still going to come together.
You are Locked On Bears, your daily Chicago Bears podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This is Locked On Bears, and I'm your host, Lauren Cox. I'm here to bring you your daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. You can follow me on Twitter at CoxSports1. You can follow the podcast on all of your favorite social media platforms, including the Locked On Bears YouTube channel, where you can keep up with all of our video podcasts as well. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by Monopoly Go, the mobile hit twist on classic Monopoly. Join your friends and download Monopoly Go, now free on the App Store or Google Play. On the show today, we go through the Chicago Bears 2024 draft class, ended up being 5 players instead of their initial 4 picks. We'll put out some grades on each of these picks, look at the class more holistically, and then do more of a deep dive on the day 3 draft picks here. The third, and really, I guess the third round and later draft picks, which is technically day 2, but the later round picks, right? The offensive tackle from Yale, the punter from Iowa, and the edge rusher from Kansas. A lot to get into with all 3 of those guys, but we'll do some scouting reports and kind of look at the value of those picks and so much more. But I want to make sure, we don't blow by the draft class as a whole and take the big picture look and not, there was so much celebration of Caleb Williams and Rome Odunze the first couple of nights, and then, day 3 is all about like, oh man, we're going to nitpick all these day 3 draft picks. But like big picture, you take a step back here. The Bears did get their franchise quarterback and their franchise wide receiver. I know we talked about that on Friday's podcast a little bit. I'm not going to rehash the whole thing, but like that is monumental here. And at the end of the day, when you start to evaluate this Bears draft class, what those 2 first-round picks will do will drastically outweigh what any of the later round picks do. Like, yes, we're going to go in depth here on the 3rd round pick, the 4th round pick, and the 5th round pick here, and maybe have some consternation here and get caught up in like, okay, what do they do? What is this player going to be? But at the end of the day, those picks are all closer to lottery tickets, right? You're hoping they become something, but much less likely to be impactful and much less likely to be as impactful as the likes of Rome Odunze and Caleb Williams. And how we look back on this Bears draft class as a whole will be largely dependent on how successful Caleb Williams and Rome Odunze are. Like, if those 2 guys are great and the other 3 picks do nothing, we're all still going to think this was a great draft class, right? You know what I mean? Those weigh so much more than the rest. And so when I start to think about grading this draft class as a whole, those first 2 picks have to weigh a lot more heavily in the overall evaluation here than any individual thoughts on the later picks. Like, the later in the draft you go, the less weight the grade should have because the less you're expecting from those picks anyway. So like across the board, I think Caleb Williams and Rome Odunze are both absolute home run A-graded draft picks here. You can't do any better than Caleb Williams with the number 1 pick, and you couldn't hope for anything better than Rome Odunze with the 9th overall pick. I mean, that is the top of the mark. Can't get any better than that. Those are super exciting picks that the Bears absolutely needed to make, and you're never going to have anybody second-guessing the Bears' decision there, right? Even with hindsight, if one of them doesn't work out, you're going to look back and say, well, that's who anybody running the Chicago Bears in that spot would have taken those 2 players in those spots. So you can't fault them, even if that doesn't end up working out. It was the right idea, the right process, the universally, beloved picks there. Then you get in the 3rd round with Kiran Amegadjie, whose name I'm still working on pronouncing, but Amegadjie from Yale. Ryan Poles says best player available on the board, an offensive tackle in the 3rd round, a developmental offensive tackle, and we'll get into his scouting report more specifically in a little bit here. But like, for me, I give that a solid B grade. I think the 75th overall pick is right around where Amegadjie was projected. That's where he ranked, right around on the, all the consensus big boards. When you sort of accumulate all the big boards together, like that's about where his value was. I think he's a prospect that's got a lot of ceiling and a lot of value down the line here. And certainly you're not expecting every 3rd round pick to come in and be a day 1 starter. So I'm not like, and I wasn't upset when the Bears went offensive tackle in the 3rd round. It was Ryan Poles saying this was the best player available on our board, and I'll take it. Ideally, it would have been nice to land a defensive lineman or, a player that might be able to have a little bit more of a year one impact, but that's not really the way to fully evaluate these picks. So I give Amegadjie a B grade there, where it's not bad at all. I'm not upset about it at all. There are other players, to get an A, you would have liked to get, one of the pass rushers maybe they just quite missed on Braylon Trice from Washington was the pick before them, I think. You have to wonder if that changes anything in Ryan Poles' mind, but said, we're going with the tackle. I think he can develop into a starting caliber tackle or guard maybe as soon as like 2025 next year. And so I think that's a solid, really good B graded pick. Then you go in the fourth round with the punter Tory Taylor coming from Iowa. We're going to talk about this coming up here in the next segment here. I give Tory Taylor a C grade here. I think he's a great punter. I think he was the best punter in this draft. I think he's going to be a very good punter in the NFL. I really like watching Tory Taylor. I've scouted Tory Taylor in person at Iowa and at the Senior Bowl. I've talked to Tory Taylor. I like Tory Taylor a lot. And we're going to get into this. There's not a reality where a fourth round pick on a punter is a good draft pick. I'm not giving it an F. I'm not saying it was the worst pick in the draft. I'm not saying it was terrible. We're going to get more into this in a minute. But I give it a C grade because I just don't think it's good value at the punter position. And I've gotten a lot of flack for that, and I'm going to defend myself here in a minute. But I give Tory Taylor a C grade there after a B for Amegadjie from Yale in the third round. And then in the fifth round with Austin Booker, the edge rusher. I struggle with this grade the most, I think, because, again, it's a fifth round pick. So I gave it a B, and I could be talked up from a B. I certainly couldn't be talked down from a B, but I could be talked up from a B grade for Austin Booker. Definitely really good value there. He was a guy who had a lot of third round grades that the Bears got in the fifth round. That's really solid. Of course, it's at a huge position of need, so I'm glad Ryan Poles was able to address it that way. But I never am a huge fan of giving up next year's draft picks to come draft a player this year. It's really easy to think, well, this guy is just as good as a guy who we could get next year, but every year you always want to have more picks from the class, and you wish, oh man, wish I would have had that pick back. And so I would have much preferred to just take Austin Booker in the fourth round instead of Tory Taylor, and I still thought it would be really good value, and still would be then you wouldn't have to give up a future pick to go and get him. And I'm not 100% sure how high his ceiling is and sort of the scheme fit as well with the Bears team. Obviously, Ryan Poles sees enough here to pull the trigger, and I'm certainly going to defer to him and give him the benefit of the doubt on obviously any and all draft picks. But Booker's not the ideal, oh man, this is the edge rusher for the Bears. It was okay, he's pretty good, and I'm glad they got an edge rusher. That's great. So that's why he's a B for me. I could be talked up from a B, but B is kind of where I'm certainly not any worse than that. It's good value at a position of need. That's always a bare minimum, at least a B. But and then to me, it's okay, maybe not the ideal pick there, and not loving giving up the future fourth to get a fifth rounder this year. You always lose value trading future picks, and that's where I give him a B. And then overall, with 2 A's in the first round and then a couple of B's and a C in the later rounds, that's an A draft class for me. Overall grade, this is an A draft class. Again, largely dependent on Caleb Williams and Rome Odunze. If they're good, they don't even have to be Pro Bowlers. They don't even have to be Hall of Famers. They just need to be, if those are hits, however you want to define a hit for those picks, if you hit on those 2 picks, it doesn't really matter to me what the rest of that class does. I mean, I think Amegadjie can become a starter maybe as soon as next season. I think Austin Booker has a decent floor there. It's just a matter of what the ceiling is. So I think he can be a contributor. And then Tory Taylor, as much as I don't like the value of that pick, he's probably going to be your punter for the next 10 years if you want him to be. He's going to be a really, really solid punter. So I can't give this draft anything less than an A grade. Even if individually there's things I would have done differently on day 3. It's day 3 of the draft. We get really caught up in oh man, in the 5th round, you should have got this guy instead. And most 5th round picks become nothing. So we're not going to be too mad about it. Most 4th round picks become nothing. So we're not going to be too mad about it. And to a lesser extent, not very many 3rd round picks become truly, truly great there either. So we're not going to get too bogged down in nitpicking the 75th pick and the 122nd pick is, it's just not as valuable as 1 and 9 really were the money makers in this draft class. I do, though, want to spend some time today, and then we're going to kind of move on, but spend some time today on those day 3 draft picks, or those day 2 and day 3 draft picks, because we didn't have as much of a chance to do that, with the draft being Friday night. We talked a lot about the first round on Friday's podcast, but let's dive in more specifically. I want to start with the punter conversation, why I don't think Tory Taylor was a good pick with that 4th round pick, and then we'll do more in-depth scouting reports on Kiran Amegadjie from Yale and Austin Booker from Kansas next on Locked On Bears. This episode of Locked On Bears is brought to you by our friends at FanDuel Sportsbook, America's #1 sportsbook. It's playoff time in the NBA and NHL, plus you've got the baseball season in full swing, so FanDuel is your place to bet on every game. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's an extra $150 in your account, win or lose, where you can bet on everything from slap shots to home runs and slam dunks, all on an app that's safe, secure, and super easy to use. You can already bet on Caleb Williams' rookie season, Rome Odunze's rookie season, over-under on the yards there, odds for offensive rookie of the year, and so much more. So what are you waiting for? Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make your first bet an automatic win. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. This episode of Locked On Bears is also brought to you by Gametime, the best way to get tickets for all of your favorite live events, especially the playoffs, whether it's NHL or NBA. You can get great last-minute ticket deals for all of your favorite teams. I love the NBA playoffs. I actually just used the Gametime app about an hour before recording this podcast on my phone to get tickets for what could be a decisive Game 5 Pacers at Bucks in Milwaukee. Maybe we'll get a healthy Giannis. Maybe we'll see how healthy the Bucks are, but certainly to see Tyrese Halliburton and Miles Turner from the Pacers as well. Like, it's going to be a great Central Division playoff matchup in a deciding game. I'm really excited to go. I got my tickets on Gametime because I could see my view from my seat, so I knew exactly what I was going to get in Pfizer Forum. And they have all-in pricing and last-minute deals, so I saved a ton of money and didn't have any surprise fees pop up at the last minute that made it cost more than I thought it would. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use our promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem our code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. The Chicago Bears should not have used the 122nd overall pick on a punter. No disrespect to Tory Taylor. I think Tory Taylor is a great punter, but there is not a reality in which a 4th-round pick is good value for the punter position. The same is true for kickers, and the same is true for long snappers. And it has nothing to do with Tory Taylor. It has nothing to do with him as a punter or how great he is, because I really was conflicted here because I love Tory Taylor. I am on the record as loving Tory Taylor. When we talked at the Senior Bowl on this podcast, we talked to Robert Schmidt from the Bears blog, and he has a great YouTube channel as well, breaking down the NFL, where we talked about Tory Taylor absolutely booming punts at the Senior Bowl this year. I saw an Iowa game in person from the press box and watched him warm up where he was standing, I don't remember, he was standing in the end zone during warmups and was booting punts and landing them inside the 20, like the other 20. Like I've seen this punter scout, and I've loved watching him punt. I'm excited for what Tory Taylor is going to do in the NFL, and I will be rooting for him to have success with the Chicago Bears. He is a weapon. He is great, and I totally understand why everyone loves Tory Taylor. I really like Tory Taylor too, and I would have loved Tory Taylor as a 6th-round pick. Maybe a late 5th, maybe a 5th. You could talk me into the 5th-round pick, but like within the top 125 here, at 122 is not good value for the position. Yes, I've heard so many of the counter arguments to my opinion here that I want to address. I've heard a lot of, well, Lauren, everyone has said throughout this draft process that this year is a weak draft class, right? That once you get to day 3 of the draft, there's not a lot of depth here, and the difference between a late round guy and an undrafted free agent is pretty minimal. So those later round picks aren't as valuable. So why not go get the best punter in this draft, someone who is a guaranteed starter and upgrade for your team? And that I certainly understand, wanting the guaranteed starter and upgrade for your team. But I think the idea of the weak draft class is true on aggregate. As a whole, yes, day 3 of this draft is weak, but not specifically in practice in that window there, right? The draft is always stronger and weaker in specific positions and specific areas. This was not a draft class that was deep at edge rusher, for example. This was not a draft class that was particularly strong like later on. The running back class as a whole was not very good. The tight end class as a whole was not very good. But this was a draft that was deep in interior offensive linemen. This was a draft that was deep in wide receivers. I guess it wasn't very deep in safety, but at any given point in the draft, there are going to be good players on the board, even if the class as a whole doesn't have as much depth. And certainly in the fourth round where the Bears were picking, there were a number of other good defensive linemen still available at that time. There were safeties available. There were interior offensive linemen to like as well. And I certainly understand like any one of those you can make a counter argument with, but like any of those positions could have a great impact at a position of need for your team. It wasn't like there was nothing there, so you had to just take the punter. It was like, no, there were other players there, but they valued perhaps the best punter in this draft a bit more. I hear a lot that, oh yeah, Tory Taylor is going to be such a weapon for this Bears defense. He's going to be such a big upgrade. There was a numerical study that aligned sort of how many points a good punter can be worth based on net yards per punt. And it's certainly true that Tory Taylor was a huge weapon for Iowa, that he was everything for them, and that he was spectacular and potentially a super special generational caliber punter, and will be a valuable piece for this Bears defense. I'm not saying he doesn't have value or that he's not good or useful for this team. It's whether a fourth round pick is worth that for a team. Because everyone points to, well, Trenton Gill was last in the NFL in net yards per punt. And I will say, I'm not here to defend Trenton Gill at all, but there is more to punting than just net yards per punt. Hang time, direction, and location matter a lot in what's a good punt versus a bad punt. It's not always just distance, but it's distance relative to the ability for your coverage team to be able to get down there and cover the punt. And this idea of out-kicking your coverage like is a thing. Not that Tory Taylor doesn't really do that, but it's just the point being like distance is not always universally the best measurement there. Trenton Gill was not a good punter last season. I don't think he was the worst punter in the NFL, but he was not a good punter last season. And the Bears needed an upgrade at the punter position. But what I'm stuck on here is two main aspects. One, that the difference between the very best punter in the NFL and the 10th best punter in the NFL doesn't seem that big to me. Like to me with punter, you can't get away with having a bad punter, but as long as your punter is good enough, that's fine. I don't need an elite punter. A good enough punter is fine. The difference between a good enough punter and a great punter is minuscule in the NFL. And so it's not worth giving up a fourth round pick to get a great punter when you could sign. There are average punters hit free agency every single year. Two or three of them changed teams this offseason. I think one of the players who was top 10 in net yards per punt, everyone's favorite stat for Trenton Gill, changed teams in free agency this year. I don't know if it was the guy who left the Texans or the guy who went to the Texans, but like, I already feel stupid for talking this much about punters, but like people were really mad at me for saying Tory Taylor was not a good use of a fourth round pick. Because people say, well, all the other fourth round picks are crapshoots anyway, and most of them don't become anything. Whereas Tory Taylor is a plug and play starter, guaranteed huge upgrade. And I kind of reject both of those premises a little bit on the surface. That first of all, like Tory Taylor is really, really great in college. That doesn't guarantee that he's going to be really, really great in the NFL. Probably. Odds are pretty good, and that's why you take him, but like that's nowhere near a guaranteed success there that it's just going to instantly translate and be perfectly exactly the same as he was in college. But also for me, it's about what a fourth round pick can become. Like, yes, most of them don't pan out to be anything decent. Some of them become Eddie Jackson. Some of them become Amon-Ra St. Brown. And there's no reality where if Tory Taylor is Ray Guy, if he is a Hall of Fame punter, he will not be as impactful to the Chicago Bears as Eddie Jackson or Amon-Ra St. Brown. Like on the highest end of their spectrums, a Hall of Fame punter is only as impactful as like a pretty darn good starter, but like he only touches the ball 3 or 4 or 5 times a game. And if Caleb Williams and Rome Odunze are as good as we want them to be and hope they will be, then he will touch the ball even less than that. Like I get it helps the defense in some ways, and it would help the defense, with a 5th or a 6th round pick or a 7th round pick, it's a little bit easier to stomach. But like the 4th round, you can still find quality players in the 4th round, like that close in the top 125, close to the, almost to the top 100 there. Like good players go in that range every year. And I would rather take a swing on a guy that can really make a more significant impact on my football team down the line than a punter who, even in the best case scenario, is only going to affect my team on 4 or 5 or 6 plays a game, as opposed to that defensive end that plays 40 plays a game, or that wide receiver who plays 50 plays a game, or you name it. Any of those guys can be much higher impact players than a punter. It says a lot to me that Tory Taylor was the only punter drafted in this year. And one other thing I forgot to mention too, you look at the top punters in the NFL this season. I sort them by PFF grade here because it includes a little bit more than just net yards per punt, but it's not important to argue whether these guys are truly the best of the best or whatever, but top 10 punters in the NFL, where they were drafted. 165th pick, 70th pick, undrafted, 149, undrafted, 172, 247, undrafted, 174. Out of the top 10 punters in the NFL this season, one was drafted earlier than Tory Taylor. And I don't think, if my draft pick number math is correct here, Michael Dickinson is the only fourth-round pick in that list. Brian Anger is a third-round pick in the list. The rest of the top 10 punters in the NFL this season were all fifth-round picks, sixth-round picks, seventh-round picks, or undrafted rookie free agents. Out of all 32 starting punters in the NFL last season, 14 came into the NFL as undrafted free agents. 5 were seventh-round picks. So more than half of the punters in the NFL have been seventh-round picks or undrafted free agents. Almost exactly half have been undrafted free agents. Every year, starting caliber punters go undrafted. And again, I'm not convinced that, I am convinced Tory Taylor's a very good punter, but the difference between having punter number 1 and punter number 10 is not that significant in the NFL. As long as my punter is good, that's all I need for my special teams to be successful. And you can find good enough punters undrafted every year and in free agency every year, and not with a fourth-round pick, where the players that fourth-round picks can become, you don't get the opportunity to find in many other places. So it's worth it to me to take a swing on a position player that can have a much bigger impact than even a punter who I'm pretty sure is going to be really good, but even a really good punter can only have so much impact on a team. It does kind of mix up the conversation, though, compared to some of the other picks when it comes to Amegadjie, Kiran Amegadjie, the third-round pick from Yale, and Austin Booker, the the fifth-round pick from Kansas. Those are the guys we talk about more as those developmental players that you hope can become something special in those picks. And I would like to use the fourth-round pick on another guy in that type of vein, but we'll get to know this FCS-level offensive tackle and edge rusher in the fifth round who made exactly one career start in college. That's next on Locked On Bears. This episode of Locked On Bears is brought to you by our friends at Monopoly Go. I know what you're saying. Flag on the play. We've already talked about Monopoly Go, but there's just so much good stuff in the game. In Monopoly Go, you can team up with friends for timed tournaments where you guys work together to build up each other's boards. And then the more you win together, the more awesome prizes you unlock. And there's so much more to get, with unique stickers that you could trade with friends to complete albums for big prizes. You got cool new playing pieces to travel the boards with, and hilarious emojis for taunting friends when you smash their buildings or heist their bank vaults. Plus, Monopoly Go just feels new and exciting every day with constantly changing tournaments and challenges. A ton include their own unique mini games as well, like digging for treasure or a robot pachinko machine. And there's so many new timed events to help you win big, like massive multipliers for everything you win. So there's always something fun to discover in Monopoly Go. Get off the bench and go download it now free on Google Play or the App Store. Game on. I think both Amegadjie and Austin Booker fall in somewhat similar categories in terms of players who have a lot of physical tools that you love, but need some polish and some work to really properly utilize those physical tools and reach their full potential in the NFL. Definitely both are a little bit more of project players, guys who I would keep expectations a little bit low for at least the first year as they adjust to the NFL level and the NFL skill set. But with the right coaching, you can absolutely see the vision and the ceiling and the ability to become, potentially significant contributors to this Bears team. Let's start in the third round with Yale offensive tackle Kiran Amegadjie. We're working really hard on the pronunciation there. Amegadjie. Emphasis on the meh, but more like Amegadjie. He is definitely a big, long, physical prospect that you love, like the body type, right? If you were trying to form what you think an offensive tackle in the NFL should look like, that's Amegadjie. He's got the size, he's got the length, he's got the strength, he's got the power. He is a physical player through and through. Really, really long arms, which helps keep defenders off of him and keeps guys from getting up under his pads and moving him. Certainly in pass protection, you see that length really be a big advantage for him, so that when he gets back in his pass set, he's not letting any of that contact really get inside of him. In the running game, he definitely is a guy who can generate some power and likes to be physical, but I think you could even push for a little bit more of that from him. Like, he's got it. He's got it when he really digs out in it, and he doesn't shy away from the contact, but it's about, like, he could even be a little bit meaner and a little bit nastier, a little bit more of a finisher on some of those plays. But definitely the power and physicality you like at the offensive tackle position. And at Yale, he started games at both left tackle and left guard. Early in his career, he was at left guard, spent the last couple of seasons at left tackle for them. I think he made like 10 starts at guard and 14 or so at tackle. I mean, double digits in both. He has that versatility. He said in his press conference after the Bears drafted him that, he kind of prefers tackle and thinks of himself as an offensive tackle, but is willing to play anywhere that they want him to. And Ryan Poles has kind of indicated, like, yeah, he's going to start out at left tackle for now, compete with Braxton Jones as a rookie. I think Ryan Poles said, like, more realistically, thinks that he's going to compete to start in year 2. I think they're still going to compete in year 1, but he's not expecting Amegadjie to beat out Braxton Jones in year 1, but to be more of a swing tackle who can play both left and right tackle, but also has that versatility to play guard. That, if this season Braxton Jones takes another big step forward and keeps developing and growing and just really locks down, looks like a franchise left tackle, well, then maybe Amegadjie could kick inside to guard, and then if for some reason Tevin Jenkins leaves in free agency, or you decide to move on from Nate Davis, could Amegadjie kick into guard and end up becoming a starter there? Like, that's what I like about the pick, is that he's not just purely an offensive tackle upgrade, but also a guy who could contribute at another position if you needed him to. Because there's a reality here where Darnell Wright and Braxton Jones lock down those jobs, and you would hate for that third-round pick to be a tackle only, who never really has a chance to play then, because Braxton Jones and Darnell Wright, hypothetically here, become so great that there's just no room to compete and knock them off. So the fact that Amegadjie could kick into guard in a pinch and potentially contribute there gives that pick a lot more value for me. I don't think we ever got into his weaknesses, but a guy who definitely from a technique standpoint has some work to do. Gets a bit high in his pads and can give up leverage to guys as a result of that, and just sort of marrying the hands and the feet properly in terms of technique. He's got good hands, he's got good feet, but they don't always operate on exactly the same page here. So being able to kind of refine some of those things, which a year on the bench can do a lot for him in that. And in a pinch, he could step in as a starter, as a potential swing tackle here. Definitely pushes all your other offensive tackles down the depth chart here. Larry Borum on the roster block. And then also FCS competition, right? Playing at Yale. Not as many NFL draft picks against him on those defensive lines. So the level of competition is going to be a step up that he's going to have to get used to. He certainly has the physical tools to take on NFL competition. Certainly he looked the part when he's played those caliber players, but just need to see it more consistently now that he has more opportunity to show his ability to do so. So that's kind of where I come up with the B grade for Amegadjie, because of that versatility and because he's on that track to be a starting caliber player as early as year 2. You'd wish a third round pick ideally could start in year 1, but if you really feel like he has some special tools there that you can develop, then let's see it through and see what he can ultimately become on this Bears offensive line. Austin Booker in the 5th round out of Kansas is a similar story in terms of like raw tools that you like, but not ready to be like a every down starting player right now, and needs a bit more refinement in terms of how he uses those tools that he has. Booker's interesting because I think his college career started at Minnesota, didn't really play much, transferred to Kansas this year, and was kind of like their rotational pass rusher, kind of off the bench. Like, still played like 40 snaps a game, but was not a starter for them, but led them in forced fumbles and sacks. So he was kind of their designated pass rush guy, but only made one actual start this season. And so definitely inexperienced. Has not played a ton of games, and you can see a certain amount of rawness in his tape. Even he, after he was drafted, he kind of admitted, like, yeah, like he was asked, like, is raw a good way to describe it? He was like, yeah, I still haven't reached my full potential here, and I'm still becoming the best version of myself here. So definitely some inexperience and some rawness there. And he's also very much on the lighter side. I think at the combine he was like 245. At his pro day he bulked up to 253. But he's much more built like an outside linebacker. Like again, Leonard Floyd type of body, not skill set, but body there, where it's just a little bit longer, a little bit more lean. I was going to use the word frail, but he's not frail, but just lean and wiry kind of frame, because he's got length. He's got the long arms. He's got pretty good burst off the line of scrimmage. He can bend a little bit and turn the corner. He's also got some pretty good pass rush instincts. We saw over the course of this season his repertoire expand a little bit. He's not just a kind of a up and under kind of guy, but we saw him kind of sprinkle in different counter moves over the course of the season. That doesn't mean he comes in with a perfect pass rushing repertoire, and he's just, a perfectly molded NFL pass rusher ready to go. But like, it seems like he's got some decent foundation to a variety of moves that the Bears defensive line coach Travis Smith can like take that and go, okay, great. You get the concept here. You have the right idea, but let's just tweak this slightly, or let's do this a little bit sooner, or wait a half beat before you do that to really kind of read what the offensive tackle or offensive lineman across from you is doing. Because that seems to be a big part of his operation, is like from the snap, like waiting to engage for a second to kind of see what the tackle is going to do. And I think they can kind of drill in a little bit more of that, like be the aggressor as a rusher and maybe get more out of them there. I am curious, like, what his ceiling ends up being, because I think he can be more than what he was at Kansas, but he's not the biggest, he's not the strongest, and he's also not like elite speed guy, right? Like we talk about Leonard Floyd, I said like body type but not skill set, because like Leonard Floyd was elite burst off the line of scrimmage, elite bend around the edge, just super fast, dynamic, freak athlete edge rusher. Austin Booker has some explosiveness, but he's not the fastest guy. He's not an elite speed guy. He's not an elite explosiveness guy. So like, I just wonder exactly how great that can become. I think he can be a very good contributing player, but like, does he ever become Montez Sweat good? Probably not. Like, it's hard for me to see. Like, he gets Max Crosby comparisons, and I get it, but he's got a lot of ways to get there, right? Max Crosby has become really strong. Max Crosby, I don't know if he added a lot in terms of explosiveness, but like, I think Max Crosby has a little bit more explosiveness than what Booker has. But I mean, we'll see as he gets stronger. If he adds some mass, and that includes more muscle mass in his leg, you can build explosiveness a little bit in that regard. But you could also slow yourself down by adding muscle mass. So Booker's development is going to be interesting to me. Like I think we got to keep in mind he's a 5th round pick, and think about like the trajectory of a Dominic Robinson is a little bit more of like what a 5th round pick usually does. So we can't come in and expect Austin Booker to become Max Crosby, but if he can become a decent rotational pass rusher who this season has a couple of nice splash plays, maybe gets 2 or 3 sacks over the course of the year because teams are still trying to learn how to block him and what his skill set is. Like, that to me is where I kind of set expectations for him year one. He's not starting over DeMarcus Walker, but he's in that rotation and getting some key pass rushing down snaps this year. So that's this Bears draft class in a nutshell. Like, I guess we didn't go in depth on Tory Taylor's skill set, but huge leg, great hang time, great direction, everything you ever want in a punter, 100%. Amegadjie and Booker, a little bit more developmental guys there. But hopefully that gives you a better understanding of what these prospects are as they come to the Chicago Bears. We're going to get to know the Bears draft picks even more in the coming days and weeks on the podcast. We're going to talk to our friends from Locked On Washington about Rome Odunze and why he says Rome Odunze is the favorite player he's ever covered for the Washington Huskies, and we'll get to know his skill set a bit more, plus some of these Bears undrafted free agents, and we'll look at what's still ahead, because the Bears may sign a defensive lineman today, Monday. There's the compensatory pick deadline for free agents counting towards the compensatory pick formula ends today. So I think there's going to be another wave of free agency that starts today. So we're going to break down any and all free agent signings as well. So lots more coming your way. Even though the draft is over, we aren't going anywhere. And that means every day I'm still going to give you another opportunity to bear down.